Hello everyone, this is Jason from Primetime Aquatics. In this video we have part 3 of our beginner series. In this part we're going to be talking about how to set up an aquarium, and I thought who better to help us out with this than Joanna. Say hello.
Hi. If
you've been around the channel at all, you will know that Joanna is the one where any tank that looks good in the fish room, you've had a hand in it, and any tank that looks not good in the fish room is probably because I did it. So we are going to take you step by step how to set up a fish tank. This happens to be a 10 gallon, but the rules, the principles apply no matter what size tank you have. If you haven't seen the first 2 parts of this beginner series, highly recommend check them out, especially part 2, where we do a comprehensive list of everything you need to set up an aquarium. In this part, we're going to be using those pieces and parts to make this look awesome. Appreciate you being here. So I guess the first thing to consider is the tank itself. 2 things you want to do before we get into any setup, and that is if it's a larger tank and you have a fish tank stand, get that stand level. Make sure the tank is on the stand where you want it in your room. If it is a tank that's going to be on a desktop, just make sure again that everything is level, and basically you're going to put the tank where you want to set it up. So for our demonstration purposes, we want this tank right in the middle of our fish room.
Yes, it's going to be a good spot.
I really think it is. Now, second thing, before you do anything to the tank, you're going to want to make sure that it's clean. Couple things. You can use glass cleaner on the outside of the tank. So step 1, just give the tank a little bit of a cleaning. Outside of the glass that's never coming into contact with living things, you can use glass cleaner and paper towels. Inside the tank, you want to use stuff that's not going to be dangerous for your fish. So really no hardcore cleaning agents. Usually just some water and a paper towel just to kind of wipe down the sides and the bottom, and you're going to be good to go. Next thing, you'll notice that this tank has already got a background attached. Normally that's the first thing I do with a fish tank is I will attach a background. That is not necessary, as we talked about in the last part of the beginner series. But if you want to attach a background, now's the time. If it's paper or you want to do like a store-bought background, just simply using Scotch tape along the sides of the tank, the top frame and the bottom frame is more than enough. Again, not necessary, but that's pretty much where we're at this point. Okay, so Joanna's getting ready to show us some of the next parts, but one of the things that I like to do first is whatever light that you're going to use for your tank, go ahead and get that attached. This one just happens to be an Aquarium LED that attaches to the back just like this. And the reason for that is we want to be able to see what we're doing inside the tank. And so therefore, the light goes on, and now we're ready to do the rest of the stuff in the tank. So we got the tank clean. We now have a light. All right, so the next thing you want to do is you want to start thinking about your filtration, whether that's a sponge filter or a hang on the back, and just place it on the tank. Now this happens to be the Aquatop Forza 5 to 15 that we mentioned in the last video. Again, if you want more information about the equipment that we're adding to this tank, check out that part 2. So this filter, perfectly adequate for a 10 gallon tank. It is a hang on back filter. We're just going to get an idea about where we want it. So this will be a pretty good location, and we want to do that before we start putting the decorations in the tank. And again, super important at this point, we really want our tank in the location that it's going to be in, its final resting place, before we start putting gravel or rocks or anything else in the tank. All right, so the next thing we want to do is now we can actually start putting the decorations and everything in the tank. But the first thing we want to do is the substrate. So whether you bought sand or gravel, that's the next thing that's going to go. Now this is where the tank's going to get a little bit heavier, which is why we want it in the location that we're going to be keeping it in. Joanna's going to hand the gravel over because it's going to be easier for me to pour the gravel in. So I'm going to go ahead and pour some in. All right, so what we did there is I poured in roughly about 10 pounds of gravel, about half of this 20-pound bag. General rule of thumb is you need about a pound of substrate per gallon of fish tank. So we've got that. And the trick here is we're using black gravel. You can use whatever color you want. The darker it is, the easier it's going to be to maintain. For the most part, we really like black substrates, black sand, black gravel. Sometimes we go with brown. The white stuff, white sand, white gravel can be a little bit harder to maintain, and so that's why we went with the darker substrate. But now that we've got the gravel in, we can start doing the fun part, and that is where do we want to put our decorations. Now, one interesting little tip or trick when you are new to setting up a fish tank, when it comes to the substrate, it's nice to sometimes have more towards the back than the front. And I really can't see what I'm doing here very well, but you get the idea, right? And that way we can kind of slope it from front to back, and it just gives it a little bit more of a dynamic feel. Next thing, now we're going to do the aquascaping, and I'm going to let Joanna come back here and try to aquascape this tank from behind the tank, because it's going to be a little bit more difficult for her to do, and you need to be able to see.
Well, I like to start with the actual decorations. So your largest piece, say it's a log or a house, whatever it is. So I've got this kind of fun structure here, and you want to stick with everything that you're putting in here. I would really only fill up maybe a third of the tank. You want a lot of space for the fish to be able to swim around and for your eyes to rest. I usually don't put anything smack in the middle of the tank, usually off-centered. Also, keep in mind, you're going to want to clean the glass on the inside. So that means you're going to be using a siphon, and you need room all around your decorations to get that siphon in and to scrape the glass. So you never want to put anything right directly up against the glass. Now I'm going to put the heater in, and I usually like to put it kind of close to the filter, so we have all of the mechanics all kind of close together. And then the warmer water also gets circulated better that way. Quick rule of thumb, I like to get a variety of different plants, from tall, never as tall as the actual tank itself. You want some room above the plants, but with fake plants you can always cut them, just so you know. I get a variety of tall, medium, and small. Worst case is you have more than you need that you can always return. Then I place the tallest ones first. And I also like to get multiples of the same kind of plant. It gives a little bit of kind of cohesive look around the tank.
All right, so Joanna did a great job of aquascaping this, and again, the thing is, decorate the tank how you want it. This is just what we did. If you want more color, if you want different types of decorations, just make sure they're fish safe, and you should be in good shape. Now, the next thing, believe it or not, is we need to fill this tank with water. And again, we're just making sure we have the tank exactly where we want it. So we're going to go ahead and fill this with water. Now, there's a couple ways you can do this. We happen to have in our fish room, as you might imagine, a system where we can bring a hose directly to the tank from the tap water. And what we're trying to do here when we fill it is make sure the water is roughly right around 76 to 78 degrees out of the tap. One thing that we haven't done here that you would want to do is, if you purchased a thermometer, and if you took my advice in the second part of the beginner series, that would be a thermometer with a suction cup, or it would float. You're going to put that in the tank as you begin to fill it, and that's going to tell you the temperature of the water. Usually for us with the 76 to 78, when you get enough experience, you can kind of give it a little bit of a field test, and it will feel like 76 to 78. But as long as there's no fishing right now, that's not the most important thing. We just want it to be roughly a little bit warmer than room temperature. So we've got this thing filling. If you were using buckets, go ahead and fill your tank, but we are going to need a water conditioner. And we use Fritz Complete. It's a fantastic water conditioner. Again, there are links for everything in the part 2 video. The directions on this thing say a capful per 50 gallons. So we've got about 1/5 of that. We're going to approximate it. It doesn't have to be absolutely positively exact. So we pour a little bit in here, and then we just dump it in just like that. And that will make sure that the chlorine and the chloramines, which can be dangerous to fish, and your beneficial bacteria are neutralized. And so we're going to go ahead and let this thing fill, and then we'll talk about what's next. Okay, so now that we've got the tank filled with water, the next step is we have to turn on the rest of the electronics, the heater and the hang-on back filter. Before you plug the hang-on back filter in, it would be a really good idea just to check inside and make sure that there's nothing in there that needs to be assembled. Usually that just means the filter media might need to be unwrapped and placed in the filter. So for this aqua top, we have some filter floss with a carbon insert and the sponge. it was already unwrapped for us. So I slide this stuff in here like this. The next thing we have to do is, for some hang-on back filters, we have to fill up the back with water before we get it started, and that's really important. You can just take a little cup. You can take that water directly from the water that's already in the tank and just put some in the back, or fill up the back from the tap just to get it started. All right, so we're gonna go ahead and we're gonna plug in the rest of our electronics, both the heater and the hang-on back filter. Now, one quick thing when it comes to safety with your electronics, we wanna make sure that our cords are off the floor. We don't want them around water. Highly recommend using a loop system so that if any water gets on the cords and it starts to drip, it doesn't go into the outlet itself. That can be dangerous. So the filter is doing its thing. It might take a minute to suck in the water to get the suction that we need in order for it to start flowing, but it's already starting to do that. If it's making any noise or grinding noise, a little bit more water in the back may alleviate that problem. Now, when it comes to the heater, we want to approximate. So if the heater tells us that we are approximately at 76 to 78 degrees, that's great. But like I mentioned in part 2, we are going to depend on the thermometer that we add to the tank to tell us the actual temperature. And so that might take 5 or 6 hours to really make sure that we have a stable temperature. If you find out in a few hours, oh, it's close to 80, you can turn the heater down a little bit and then watch the temperature and make sure that's down between that 76 to 78 degrees. If it's not quite high enough, turn it up a little bit. But again, I never use the temperature on the heater itself to tell me the temperature of the tank. I'm going to use a thermometer to do that. The last thing we're going to do is add the lid. The lid is going to make sure that we're keeping the water in the tank and keeping our fish in the tank as well. So it's going to cut down on evaporation, and it's going to make sure our fish don't jump out the top. And so at this point, we have just set up a fish tank. The next thing we want to do is add this. This is one of the most important things that you can do as a new fish keeper, and that's add this. It's called Fritzyme 7. It has live nitrifying bacteria, and what that does is it's going to help us cycle our tank. It's going to help avoid ammonia and nitrite spikes later on, and that is the number one thing, one of the number one things that can go wrong when somebody is first starting to keep fish. So we're going to add this as directed. This is another one where we don't have to be super exact. We read the directions and put in the proper amount. Now, you could, in theory, add fish as long as your water is dechlorinated, as long as your tank temperature is appropriate for your fish. Once you add this, we've done this a number of times where you can add fish while adding this. Usually we only add 1, maybe 2 fish, especially to a tank this size. I recommend adding this and still give yourself a day or 2, wait, and then you just add this as directed, and it's going to help save you a lot of problems later on. So we have set up our very first fish tank. It wasn't that hard to do. In the next video, we're going to talk about how to add fish. And if we do that properly, we can have a much higher likelihood of success early on. If you want to learn more about the nitrogen cycle, I highly recommend check out this video in the upper right-hand corner. If you want more beginners videos, check out the playlist in the lower right-hand corner, because that will also contain the first 2 parts of this series. Appreciate you being here, and we'll see you in the next one.